So welcome to another Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram. I'm Product Marketing Director for Cloud Director and a suite of products. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Clive and Lucas. Clive, why don't we go with you first? Can you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Clive Wemman. I'm a content architect for the Hands on Lab team. I've actually worked for VMware for about just over 12 years now. Pretty much done every field role, and now I'm sort of focused on doing Hands on Lab.
Great, thanks, Clive. And Lucas, welcome.
Yes, thank you. My name is Lucas Nguyen from Dell Technologies Solutions Co-Creation Services team. And my focus is to look at solutions from Dell's cloud service provider team to work integration with VMware.
Excellent. And that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yep.
In case people didn't realize, there's been an integration with Dell vxRail and VCF and VCD architecturally, and Lucas, you can talk us through that in a minute. And today, really go through that at a high level, but really then focus in with Clive on the hands-on lab, which is brand new out and shows in all its glory the full VCF deployment automation and integration with VCD, which is really good news for our service providers who are looking to deploy that same configuration of cloud, those units for their customers, whether they're public or private instances with VCD as well. In my mind, a fantastic sustainable offering. So let's start with you then, Lucas. Can you just take us through what is I'm going to use the proper terminology now, the Dell Technologies Cloud Platform, yep. DTCP, with VCD.
Great. So let me share a few slides so we can have a good starting point.
Okay.
Let me know if you can see those slides yet.
You just want to go full screen? We can see them.
Okay. There we go.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So let's take a few minutes to talk about the Dell Technologies Cloud Platform and how that fits into Dell Technologies Cloud and very specific to cloud service provider space. So this is a joint reference architecture that we launched with VMware. And the official approved name you see here from both Dell and VMware is this title here, the VMware Cloud Director on Dell Technologies Cloud Platform. Okay. So private cloud actually remains a very strong market, evidently here shown with Dell in the top green, every quarter leading over the competitors. Together with VMware, we are on a continual path of strong private cloud market of $22 billion, at least 10% compound annual growth rate. So Dell has a sizable in the lead total addressable market, especially with VMware solutions. And VMware business grew, VMware OEM business through Dell grew. So depending on which key performance indicator from Dell and VMware better together, we're looking at a range of amazing growth.
And would you say, Lucas, that is more, there's more in service providers than in enterprise in that private cloud space? Where's the growth happening more in your opinion?
A little bit of both. Both. Yeah.
Okay.
All around. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. So the key question for this chart here is for partners and customers to ask is who owns and who manages the environment. And really this illustration is a summary of our joint VMware offerings. DTCP customer experience is a one-stop shop. Right? Dell Deployment Center builds, install the software, even VMware licenses for you, and ship it to you. Depending on the purchase options, it takes just days to get to you, from the ordering to receiving with a subscription model. So with Dell Pro Deploy and Pro Support services, Dell takes care of technical support, including VMware software I mentioned, and Dell hardware. So you buy from Dell, Dell builds it, Dell ship it, and Dell supports it. The cost advantage of this the Dell Technologies Cloud Platform over hyperscaler model is that Dell Financial has various options for financing, from CapEx to lease to subscription. So plus the flexibility of cloud service providers to use it as a foundation for their as-a-service portfolio for partners to deploy, manage at a customer site, right? So a subscription model in our current state of COVID gives business a leverage, a strategy for those who need to focus on short-term stability, reduce CapEx anyway possible for cash preservation to survive the pandemic. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a look at how together with VMware we are building architecting this journey. So all the values you see here add to the customer cloud journey to simplify operations across all your clouds, right? So first we have PowerEdge industry best of class compute platform, and it's the bedrock of modern data centers, right? The team partnership with VMware enables deep integration of new virtualization capabilities across the portfolio. So this translates to offering the latest version of VMware vSphere, vSAN, and VMware Cloud Foundation once available. Now on vxRail, continuing this journey of innovation and agility. So we have vxRail as industry best of class HCI. It's #1 rated compute and storage virtualization today. So for customers who have a desire to virtualize all of the infrastructure and deploy a full VMware SDDC with the benefit of automated lifecycle management, customers can start with implementing a standardized VMware SDDC architecture on vxRail. So DTCP really is a model that's consistent in design with real engineer integrations for a mature roadmap with joint collaboration from the industry, right? VMware, Dell Technologies, and it's the turnkey experience to simplify SDDC deployment. So it is the only jointly engineered HCI system today with deep VMware Cloud Foundation integration. So to further this cloud journey, flexible consumption models are becoming increasingly popular. So allowing companies to take advantage of cloud, many operational and financial benefits. IT decision makers, facing budget constraints and overstretched IT staff, they're seeking solutions to provide a greater flexibility and rapid deployment. So like, DTCP turnkey solution, so such offering, right, VMware Cloud Director and DTCP and other cloud virtualization products under VMware Partner Connect have made subscription and consumption-based IT service delivery model very attractive. So allowing cloud service providers to procure, deploy SDDC quickly. So this value design, right, gives simplicity and standardization of deploying VMware Cloud Director on DTCP. Okay, so let's take a look at what that is. So this is an illustration of the value better together of the VMware Cloud Director and DTCP. So with this value design and VMware, CSPs consume these features, shown here in the middle column. You monetize as a service offerings using a single pane class for tenant portal with usage metering and insights, service chargeback, pay-as-you-go model, and extend the services to the customers, the tenants. So CSP can consume these features and services to monetize. So let's take a look at the high-level architecture stack. This illustration, we show a complete architectural component. Let's start with DTCP, right? This illustrates an overview of first vxRail and vxRail Manager. That's the offering from Dell EMC. And then the second is the VMware Cloud Foundation, VCF. So that's the full stack integration, giving automated end-to-end lifecycle management using standardized VMware SDDC architecture, vSphere, NSX, vSAN. So to simplify operations of SDDC, part of this joint validation, we've tested with VMware Cloud Builder to simplify Cloud Foundation deployment for vxRail. And the third component here is a joint validation design, which is VMware Cloud Director, VCD. It's a single pane class environment to truly offer multi-tenant self-service portal, pay-as-you-go with usage mirroring. And so this value design gives simplicity and standardization to deploying VMware Cloud Director on DTCP. Okay. So Dell has a sizable, right, in the lead total addressable market I mentioned, especially with VMware solutions. Worth mentioning some key points. 2 of 5 off-prem workloads land at a managed provider, and 50% of the repatriated workloads will land at a hosted private cloud at a managed provider. So, these are key messages for the service providers. This is a joint value design, right? It gives simplicity and standardization to deploying VMware Cloud Director on DTCP, which is a multi-tenant environment. 2, standardization reduces the time to deploy and provision customer environment. And the third point is this solution really secure, isolate resources, right? Users, compute, memory, and storage. And the fourth is this value design, it orchestrates and provision cloud services for easy consumption to reduce CapEx. And for the tenants, with VMware Cloud Director, multi-tenancy is achieved to drive revenue growth and accelerate service deliveries to end customers. So there are key differentiating values to cloud service providers when DTCP is deployed with VMware Cloud Director. Right, first it reduces the time to deploy and provision customer environments. So we're talking minutes instead of deploy virtual machines, and the environment can scale rapidly. And VCD securely isolate resources. So with this solution, tenants get self-service capabilities without requiring CSPs to develop a bespoke solution, and tenants experience reliable and consistent cloud service. So um, so let's take a look at why service providers are excited. Okay, before we have the demo from Clive. So device design jointly with VMware simplifies deployment and reduces time to market. So this enables cloud service providers to shift engineering resources from infrastructure integration to service deployment. So optimize infrastructure, VCD on DTCP. It optimizes infrastructure investment by providing shared cloud capabilities. So Dell Technologies Cloud Platform with VMware Cloud Director is a true multi-tenant, pre-engineered, pre-tested ready design. So this provides a consistent architecture. So now let's turn the attention to the hands-on lab. And so Clive, please walk us through this portion of the demo for the modules of the available hands-on lab for the solution, VMware Cloud Director on Dell Technologies Cloud Platform, a multi-tenant infrastructure as a service. So thank you, Clive.
Okay.
Just before you dive into that, Clive, just want to kind of pick up on a few points there I think is really important. And actually, Lucas, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So, so we're taking vxRail, and we've got the vxRail lifecycle management, vxRail manager, and we can deploy one-to-many vxRails, as many as we want, depending on how big a cloud we want. As a provider, I can get those from Dell, sent to my site, plugged in, racked, stacked, ready to go, handed over with a handshake and a nice sign-off saying, here you go, this is your vxRail now delivered. The implementation of VCF is already shipped and done with the vxRail, so I can expand this cloud or contract this cloud however I want. Yep. Commercially, I'm looking at a full subscription model with Dell Financial Services if I wanted it. I could have the vxRail in any shape or size and configuration I wanted, and that would be, well, I say any, but there's a quite a big shopping list of supported configurations, right? Yes. So this is the holy grail basically, because this is what service providers have been after since day one, which is I don't necessarily have to architect and build this stuff. I can have it racked, stacked, put it in my site, managed by Dell in terms of supported and in terms of upgrades and things like that. And I'm getting the VCF stack deployed, and all I've got to do, in essence, is put VCD on top and just connect to those existing resource pools that have been configured in VCF. So, question for you then. From a support perspective, if I'm a service provider and I'm in the VMware Cloud Provider Partner Connect program, today I phone VMware when I've got any problems with my VMware stack. Is that still the case here, even if the VCF stack is coming from Dell? I guess it is, right?
Yes.
Okay. So there's got to be a gotcha. What's the gotcha? There's got to be some sort of gotcha here, because it's too perfect. Is it covered? Is it available in all regions? Is there anywhere it's not available?
Yeah. So availability, maybe we can speak on that. The North America, EMEA, and APAC. There is the gotcha you say is the specific country. Not all countries in EMEA and APAC are available, but the majority of them are. So that's one of the gotcha. The other one you mentioned is support. When customers order Dell Technologies Cloud Platform, as I mentioned before, with Pro Deploy and Pro Support, Dell takes the responsibility of installing VMware Cloud Foundation, which is VMware, and VMware software licenses, and install that on the vxRail environment, and then Dell will ship that to the customer. Okay, so that's all encompassing for DTCP. The other the only gotcha I can think of is that because Dell Technologies Cloud Platform is VCF and vxRail, today the support does not mean that Dell will install VMware Cloud Director on behalf of the customers. The customer will probably have already installed in their environment. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the gotcha. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And just one other thing on that, from a licensing perspective, then will the provider need to relicense with VCPP licenses, or would they be licensed already for that?
Yeah, great question. So once customers order to Dell, it is responsibility of the customer to provide to Dell the VMware licenses that they want to use. And then Dell will install it on their behalf and then ship it.
Awesome. That's so cool. Brilliant. All right, that's all my questions for now. I'm going to probably have some questions for Clive as we go through. Thanks.
Okay, so let me just share my screen. So hopefully you can see the hands-on labs portal there. So the best way to get to this is just go to this URL here, labs.hr.vmware.com. Obviously you need a user account, but it's super easy to set one up, and I've logged in here. The one we're looking for here, I remember the SKU, but if you want to look for this particular lab, you can just type in Dell. We actually have a few different labs here, but the one we're focusing on here is this 2160. So same thing, you can either put in Dell, or you can just put in VCD, and the tag will pick it up as well to there. So you just go and enroll. And this one's what we call an interactive simulation, so it's not running a real live environment. Simple reason for that is because some of these workflows that we're going to use with the Cloud Foundation can take up to an hour to sort of run through and everything like that. But it's just all the configuration. So just in the interest of having something that's a bit more usable in a lab environment, these are all interactive simulations. So you just get this started up. Now, because it's an interactive simulation as well, the console will not be live. Everything that we need is driven from this lab manual here. So just click on this table of content. This lab is split into 4 different modules. And we run through this end to end because it's, part of the power here is we're using Cloud Foundation. As Lucas mentioned, everything's effectively running VMware's validated design, which is best practices for deploying the whole SDDC. So we're going to deploy this end to end. We're going to start with module 1. We're going to essentially do the bring up, and this is the initial instantiation of the SDDC. What it leaves us with is what we call the management domain, which is going to run all our infrastructure for vCenter. Then in module 2, we're going to create what we call a workload domain. And this might be a kind of new concept for people. Workload domain is part of our validated designs as in a consumable piece of infrastructure. So really an SDDC that can be applied to a use case, whatever it may be. In this case, we're talking about infrastructure resources for tenants that service providers can spin up. Now, module 2 is split into 2 different sections. And really what we're trying to do is show the kind of the power and the automation of that kind of repeatability and the speed that we can get a piece of infrastructure spun up. So on the one hand, we deploy a workload domain, but then we go and deploy an NSX edge cluster in there as well. So that's really going to complete the picture for us. When we deploy a workload domain, we obviously deploy vSphere clusters based on HCI. So we end up with compute, memory, and storage. So vSAN will be set up. And then we need to put the final piece in the puzzle in there, which is the NSX software-defined networking. So we go and deploy an edge cluster. Now that's not a trivial task, but the power of Cloud Foundation doing this for us makes this a much more repeatable event, and much more fits into the way cloud operates today, is that agility that you need. If you think about the repeatability of doing workflows as well, is that we obviously can spin up the workload domain, spin up the NSX instances, the edge cluster, and also get rid of it really quickly and then redeploy those hosts for something else. So again, this fits into this more agile world. Security being a really big consideration here. Again, there's literally hundreds of things that are being configured here. Having that repeatable, if you make a mistake somewhere along the lines of something that is very mundane and everyday, but that's where you can do a misconfiguration, and that's where you can create problems in terms of SDDC infrastructure. So again, relying on automation to do this for us. this is where the power of Cloud Foundation really comes in.
I think just a note to that as well. I mean, just a nod that the more you automate, obviously, the less errors you're going to be introducing into the configuration, the less potential service outages you have in the future, the happier customers you have.
Exactly. Yeah, it's having that confidence that
Yeah.
you know, although it's pretty mundane stuff, and people consider it, you know, just every day. That's when you can make misconfigurations. And if you look at a lot of the security, you know, vulnerabilities that have been created in cloud infrastructure, 9 times out of 10, it's something simple and it's something that just got missed because people treat it as mundane. So having that workflow to do it for you. Moving on to module 3 is where we start to bring in Cloud Director. And again, what's nice about this is that I barely touch vSphere throughout this entire process. Most of the automation is done through SDDC managers, part of Cloud Foundation. And then the second part, when we're going to start creating provider virtual data centers, setting up tenant awards, and everything else, obviously everything is driven by Cloud Director.
Yeah.
Basically plugging into the vCenter and NSX manager and doing all that manipulation. And then module 4, if we got time, I'll run through this quickly. But here we're really sort of demonstrating kind of the self-service capabilities that a tenant can do by basically giving them very secure access to their NSX instance that they have, and they can do a lot of their own distributed firewalling, they can do all their own networking and everything like that.
So Clive, just to reiterate, so that I really just want to understand. So this is like a full stand-up. It is a pre-recorded lab which is orchestrating vxRail. Sorry, you might have lost me then. Okay, so it is orchestrating vxRail. It is pre-recorded. But some of these stages, module 1, module 2, they'd be pretty much done by the time it got to your site, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll be part of the DTCP service.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's obviously going to be shipped to site. I guess we're just sort of showing the power of automation and the repeatability.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think once we get to like module 2, that's going to be the kind of bread and butter where a service provider is going to spend most of their time. So.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so let's run through this one. I'll run through the actual bring up very quickly. One of the reasons it's nice to sort of run through it is because very few people get to see this part, because obviously it gets shipped to site, but it's nice to show this is where all the engineering and the code development was done between VMware and Dell, certainly around the vxRail platform. So here we've already got a vxRail cluster set up. This is going to be our management domain. So this is going to be where our first initial stand up, and we're only really creating the resources that are really going to be for the cloud provider to run all its infrastructure componentry. So first thing we do is just deploy the Cloud Builder OVE. So standard way through the vSphere client. Again, this will be delivered. You know, it will come instantiated and ready to go, all top of rack and everything else to be configured. So we just run through that, put it on the vSAN data store, put it on the management network, and then we give it all the passwords that we want it to have, and configure the network for it. Give it all our DNS. Okay, so that will then go and deploy the Cloud Builder VM. And this is like a one-time event. We only use this for the initial stand-up of Cloud Foundation. This will actually not just configure the cluster, but it will actually deploy our SDDC manager, which is where we'll drive Cloud Foundation from after that point. So now we'll connect to that, the Cloud Builder instance. We'll log in with the details. Okay, bit. Now here's where like the engineering workflow is, we've got obviously a standard one for Cloud Foundation, and we've got a specially engineered workflow that's just for doing vxRail deployments. And this is where the real engineering work has happened between Dell and VMware. So we set that. Then we have what we call a parameter sheet, an XLS spreadsheet, which is going to give us all the configuration for like IP addresses of the host, what we want a vCenter to be called, the NSX instance, and so on and so forth. So that's already been pre-built. We've sort of filled that in. It's nice to work with lots of other teams as well in terms of completing that to make sure your configuration is correct. So even that exercise is quite a nice thing to go through. We'll then go and validate everything on that, and that literally just making sure it can connect to all the hosts, making sure they can resolve themselves, that they've got the right starting state for it as well. Also ready, we're going to deploy the SDDC, and then it will go and automate that entire bring up of the management cluster for us. Make sure everything's all done.
If only it was that quick.
Yeah, in real life, this probably takes about an hour or so, but still, again, it's it's an important point. Think about, you can see through this list here everything that it's doing. Again, reasonably mundane, repeatable tasks, but I think the power of having all of that automated is kind of speaks for itself. So we finish that, and then we can launch SDDC Manager and then report to that. So we have our management workload domain now configured, and it's gone through it and set up everything. It's set up our distributed switches, it's set up the storage, it's created policies, it's created the NIC teaming, absolutely everything as per our validated design. So again, that validated design is probably not to be sniffed at in terms of supportability from VMware. If we know you're running on a certain version of validated design, means we can actually troubleshoot and get stuff done much quicker, because and everything else is backed up jointly by Dell and VMware. So that's now left us with under workload domains. We now have our management workload domain is all configured. We can see our hosts that are running in there. And we can also see it's not just deployed a vCenter, which manages that cluster, but it's also deployed an NSXT instance. Now, that NSXT instance is purely for management. This is not anything that a tenant would use, but as part of the reference architecture now, because I have NSXT deployed, I can use that for my management constructs, even including things like doing multi-site designs, so we can protect against DR. We can have that, make sure that's always available. It's really critical stuff. So yeah, we have an NSX instance just deployed for that management workload domain. So that's bring up. That's the first piece. We got our SDDC. Again, that will be delivered in that format, and that's kind of where your starting point from it. Next, we'll sort of look at workload domains, and we'll just pull this forward, because this is the interesting concept around how we can use workload domains. Workload domain at its bare minimum is a 3-node cluster. So obviously we have our own compute memory and storage, and then we'll deploy NSX along with that. When we create our first one, we're obviously going to deploy a brand new deployment of NSXT as well. We could do both models. So you can have workload domains that share an NSXT instance, or you can have ones that are discrete and one-to-one mapping. So in this diagram here, we have a workload domain here that actually has 2 clusters in there, and that is assigned its own NSXT instance there that runs up in the management workload domain. And then we've got 2 other workload domains down here. Oh, sorry, that was a one-to-one, and these 2 are actually sharing a different NSXT instance as well. So
I think with the VCD configuration, you have to have a shared one. Is that correct? I don't know if you could have a...
Typically you would. I mean, it depends how you want to do it, because we can obviously achieve multi-tenancy through Cloud Director anyway. And so, yeah, one of the most efficient ways is to deploy a shared model within that. But you may have an instance where you want to dedicate an NSX instance to it, depending on what your needs are and what the requirements of the customers are. And also think about scalability as well. So obviously workload domains, they can grow up to vSphere maximums. So as they scale up, you want to start thinking about that architecture in terms of maximum supported configurations with both vSphere and NSX as well.
Sure.
Okay, so that's the workload domains architecture. The second component is then to go and deploy the NSX edge cluster, which isn't done as part of the initial rollout of the workload domain, because although we deploy NSX, we don't have any edge systems deployed at that point. We kind of leave it vanilla. But we're going to go ahead and deploy this 2-node edge cluster as well. Typically, you'll deploy your first workload domains cluster will end up being, as you scale up, will end up being your NSX edge cluster as well. So you can scale out from that point and just keep adding more and more clusters or even more workload domains, depending on what the requirements are. So let's go and take a quick look at deploying a workload domain. And again, this is vxRail based. Sorry, I just have a question.
Sorry, yeah, if people want to know more about workload domains, it's the VMware validated design for service providers that they should go and read, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And there's also a really good white paper, which we do reference in the lab,
Yeah.
but this architecture here will run through everything in terms of how the Cloud Foundation VVD applies to.
Okay. Cool.
So let's quickly go and deploy this workload domain. So what we normally do is we go into workload domains. So you still only got our management one, but we go up here and we're going to deploy a vxRail based workload domain. Now, with this kind of workflow, because it's a little bit different, because we have vxRail manager in there as well, this is again a custom engineered workflow between VMware and Dell to accommodate the vxRail kind of value of having vxRail manager involved in terms of lifecycle management. So what we'll do here is we'll really just configure the virtual center that's going to manage it and deploy that into the management workload domain. So we'll go and spin that out, finish that, and then let's go and take a look at that workflow quickly. So whenever we run anything within SDDC manager, obviously everything's a workflow, we can go and view all the configuration tasks it's doing. So here, we're only really deploying a virtual center, but you can see everything that gets configured just as part of that, as part of our best practice in terms of, because VVD is just not just architecture, it's the order that you do things as well. And and should you rotate certificate or passwords or anything like that. So we deployed our virtual center now. Now we switch to vxRail manager. And we'll just run through this configuration for it. And again, this is very akin to what we're doing on Cloud Foundation. Here we're confirming that top of racks are being configured correctly. And then we're going to upload a configuration file for this cluster. And then once we've completed that, we're just making sure that we are, all our DNS is configured correctly there. We'll then go and add everything for vCenter. And we've got all the things like all our passwords, everything that we're going to use for ES6i hosts. And then everything for vSAN as well, what our vMotion and vSAN networks are going to be. We then ask vxRail manager to validate that configuration. Now again, these are really, these validation workflows are really powerful as well, because they'll actually jump onto the ES6i hosts and make sure that they can all ping each other, that they can resolve what we're going to configure first. So it'll actually go and do a load of stuff on the hosts prior to doing it.
So from a design perspective, Clive, I mean, this is all pre-done and given to Dell as a configuration file, or 2 configuration files we've seen so far. There's a lot of design that needs to be done in terms of thinking about how this should be laid out, and the interfaces you're going to have the system, let alone the internals. Does the VVD for Cloud Foundation or any of the VVDs kind of walk through exactly what these requirements are, so you can start? Is there a way of checkboxing what you've got to provide and what is required?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, most of them, we haven't actually seen the parameter spreadsheets because we've just uploaded them. But when you see them, even the spreadsheets themselves will guide you through, and they have all the information is on those XLS spreadsheets, which say, and it won't let you continue until you filled in all the pieces. And each configuration item will tell you exactly what it's for. So there are different sheets on the spreadsheet that explain how all this kind of works. But I think once you get used to doing the workload domains, it becomes second nature that you'll need a certain amount of configurations. So same applies to when we do like the edge cluster. But within a 6T, there's a lot more configuration there, a lot more IP networks that you need to configure. But that's the beauty using the spreadsheets. They kind of guide you through even just filling that out.
I suppose that's actually probably easier than doing a normal configuration, isn't it? Because I mean, normally you'd have this stuff written down all over the place in several different architectural documents lists. It's all in one logical document you can actually see.
Yeah, and at any point, that's kind of nice thing about Cloud Foundation is you can always refer to the DVD if you want a more in-depth explanation about what everything is. Because the VBD will actually involve design decisions in there. So they're really explaining why, the VBD is the way it is. So you can always refer to the matching edition of the VBD to really analyze and understand how you're going to build out this data center.
Okay.
Okay, so then we'll go and apply that configuration to the vxRail cluster, and then we'll go and launch vCenter. So there we go. We've got vxRail Manager has brought up the cluster now. We've got vxRail Manager deployed on the cluster, and now we just need to go and complete this workflow in Cloud Foundation. So you can see our workload domain, and we can see now we'll select the add vxRail cluster to that workload domain. Now again, if you just wanted to keep spinning this out, you're just going to go and repeat the same process for every vxRail cluster, and then just choose what workload domain you need it to be part of, and it'll kind of reconfigure everything. So we'll add on our passwords for it there. It's important because now SDDC Manager is going to effectively take ownership of this cluster and bring it in to the infrastructure. We'll then need to create an NSXT instance. So we're going to go and do all the configuration for that. So cluster name, so the VIP for NSX Manager. And it's obviously going to deploy a 3-node cluster management system for NSXT. So we'll go and configure all of that. Put in our passwords for NSX. Add the licenses that we need. And then it will go and validate the configuration before we go and do it. And then we hit go, and away it goes. So now it's going to basically take that vxRail cluster and turn it into a workload domain. Essentially, switch the vCenters that it's running against, and it's going to go and deploy that NSXT instance as well. And this is kind of the first instance of an NSXT deployment, which is going to be for consumable use. So in a service provider sense, this is one we're going to give to the tenant. Okay, so that's run through. Now we've got our workload domain.
There it is. Yeah.
We can see there's our vCenters and our NSXT. We've got our one cluster deployed there for NSX, for vxRail Manager, sorry. And if we go to the workload domain, we can see that everything's been configured. So if we go in, it's put all the plugins, all the extensions for it, everything that connect, still got all that goodness from just running vxRail against the vCenter, but also with the Cloud Foundation parts as well. And it's going to configure all our networking, create our distributed switch, configured all our data stores. Everything has been done for us through this automated workflow. Now, this workflow probably runs in about, probably can run in about 45 minutes. So in terms of spinning up infrastructure and getting it pretty much ready for being consumable, we're kind of done. From a Cloud Director perspective, from a tenant now, probably what we want to do is complete the picture by giving them all the networking services that a tenant's going to need. So things like the tier 0 to tier 1 routers effectively deploy the NSX edge cluster. So that'll be the next thing we do. So let's go and take a look at that. Scroll forward through the menu. Okay. So again, this is really the power. And again, we've been looking at vCenter just to have a look around, but really I've done all of this purely from Cloud Foundation's interface, and we just continue to do that in terms of prep. What is this good workload domain here? We're going to configure that effectively as a provider resource. I'm going to keep it really simple just for this demo. In reality, you may slice and dice this a little bit differently in terms of creating a provider virtual data center, but just in terms of understanding the flow, I'm keeping it really simple. I'm going to dedicate this cluster to a tenant. So we have the vCenter here. We need to add that. The NSX edge cluster is going to go onto this one. And again, as part of our VBD, this is how we would deploy it. Again, NSX edge clusters can be sliced and diced in different ways, but this is our validated design way of doing it. So we'll flip back to SDDC Manager. We're under the workload domain that we want to use as a provider resources, and we can just click Add Edge Cluster here. Obviously, there's a load of prereqs. you mentioned earlier, Guy, there's a whole load of other stuff that we need to have done. This is where you'd have done your reading a little bit to understand how the architecture works. But it's going to ask, are you ready to do this? Have you got all your IP addresses ready? Have you done everything that you need to do to make this workload work? So there we just say that we are. And so first thing we'll do is we'll create the edge cluster name, the bare configurations, what we're going to call our tier 0 and tier 1 routers, and what the design is going to be like as well. Now, what's important here is there's a couple of different ways we can do this, but VCF actually gives us 2 out-of-the-box ways of deploying the edge cluster. One is for workload management. So you see this warning up here. Workload management is for our Tanzu and Kubernetes solutions. For us to run workload management and to do Tanzu, we follow a very set configuration for what that edge cluster is going to be. So for example, we'll do that in a large format with active-active setup, but we can use the custom workflow here to really do anything that we want to do in terms of making that configuration smaller, maybe it'll be active standby, or we're going to do it in terms of the workload management. So here is the selector here. So if we were going to do this for Tanzu, then we'd select that workflow. If we select the custom one, then here we have the freedom to say, oh, I actually want to do small. And I could choose active standby as well if I wanted to, but that allows us some flexibility there. So in this example, we're going to use BGP. And now we're going to start configuring the 2 edge nodes that we need to deploy. So we can put in the name of that first edge node, management networks, and then we start configuring the tunnel endpoints as well, where they're going to go to as well.
Sorry to interrupt you. Here we're not using config files, we're actually generally typing stuff in. Is this now in the service provider site, racked and stacked, up and running, and service providers doing their configuration for their tenant, or is this still happening with Dell?
I'd say there's some flexibility within there. So yeah, things like the tunnel endpoints, that's obviously going to be VLAN backed. So we need to have a thought about how that, because that's always going to relate to the external networks that we're going to provide. So I would say you're going to be working with Dell in some sense to spin those up. But really, you're more in the freedom, and you would probably thought about this at the time of bring up in terms of what VLANs we're going to make available in terms of
it makes sense. I mean, I think here it's actually nicer for a provider to have this flexibility and do this themselves, because things may change depending on what they want to use that cluster for.
Absolutely. But again, you've got the freedom to kind of destroy that and recreate it really quickly as well, and do that reconfiguration. So rather than necessarily change the top of rack, it's let's delete and rebuild, and then do it that way. And so in many cases, that's a cleaner way of doing it. So now we're going to select the cluster that we want it to run on. The edge nodes will always run on the actual workload domain itself, whereas everything else for NSX obviously runs in the management domain. So this is nice because the edge nodes will be part of a consumable service, whereas the management you would want to keep separate. So even from a charging perspective, it's a nice way of running that architecture. And also makes everything much more efficient, especially if we're running firewall. We don't need to route traffic out of that workload domain effectively to do all that. So now we're going to configure the first uplinks for that first edge node, and then we're going to configure the second uplinks. The nice thing about interactive simulations, it just fills everything in for you. So we have our first edge node, and then we just go and repeat that for our second one. So it's going to be pretty much the same networking, just moving things on a little bit further. So just let that fill out.
Just confirm, when we say edge node, we're talking about T1s, right?
So the edge node cluster is going to provide the ability to create tier 0, tier 1 routers. Within them, which are logical routers. So the edge cluster is just what's going to provide the resources to do that.
I see. Got it. Okay,
So basically, when we deploy the edge cluster, it's where we're going to run our north-south firewalling, and we can also then we'll give the tenant the ability to create their own network, but they're always going to get their edge gateways, which are obviously going to be logical and virtual as well, are all going to be created on that edge cluster. So everything, those two virtual machines are going to provide all the network services for that tenant, running straight in that workload domain.
Okay.
But this will actually create the tier 0 for us, but at the moment this is just the edge nodes that we're configuring and the uplink connectability that we're configuring those edge nodes with. That's what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah.
So then we can go and once we've entered the 2 edge nodes, we're going to check the configuration. And like all good things in Cloud Foundation, we'll go and validate that configuration is going to work before we go ahead and do it. Again, it's making sure all of those networks are legit. I can ping your NTP. This route's going to work. Your top of racks are configured. And if it finds anything, it will point it out here. You could just go back, go fix it, and then keep running through this validation piece before we hit go. But everything is passed here, so the finish button will be live. If it fails anything, it's not going to let you do it. It's another nice thing about Cloud Foundation, doesn't let you go forwards and make misconfiguration. So then it will go and run that whole workflow again. Even deploying edge cluster services, it's got a lot of configuration, and again, up to our BBD design, there's a lot of things that we include in there we would consider best practice.
Yeah.
To go and deploy those pieces. Okay, so that is now finished. If we're going to take a look, we now have this is kind of what's going to be our provider virtual data center, but we actually have 2 edge nodes deployed as an edge cluster, and that's all running under this NSX instance. So we're going to take a look under here now. Under Fabric, under those, we can see we've got everything. Obviously, we've got the hosts and the compute nodes. The vCenter is already configured as part of the workload domain creation, but now we've actually got edge transport nodes configured. We can go and take a look at that. We've got our edge cluster deployed in there as well. So it's gone ahead and done all this configuration within NSXT for us as well. And we can see we've got a tier 0 as well that it's created for us as part of that.
There you go. Yeah.
That deployment, and we've got all our interfaces up and running and all our uplinks and everything.
So at this point, you're kind of ready to do Cloud Director.
You pretty much are. That's it.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, you're pretty much, you can go and create. The only thing we need to do is go and create a resource pool on that workload domain. That's the only thing we need to touch vCenter for. Everything else we can try through Cloud Director. Go and create provider virtual data centers, external networks, edge gateways, and networks that are based on, in this case, it would be Geneva virtual networks.
Yep.
Once we've done that, then we can create our org virtual data centers, and we're ready to go. Once we've configured that, and we've got the edge cluster effectively plugged into the provider virtual data center, the tenant can run everything themselves. They can go and create their own networks.
Yeah.
If we've provided the right external networks, then we can do that. And they can actually go and create their own distributed firewall that'll run off that edge cluster as well. So really powerful automation. And I guess the real point is how quickly you can get this spun up. And because you can do it so fast and it's automated, you can start to think about, well, hang on a minute, when we're finished with it, we can get rid of it as well. So it really makes the appeal of using cloud more realistic when you're an operator, because you're more willing to say, well, this will be a transient piece of infrastructure. When it's finished, we'll reclaim it, we'll repurpose those hosts, and we can spin it out very quickly as well. So the repeatability sort of fits into the true cloud provider sort of space.
Yeah, I mean, I love the building block approach to it as well. Just plugging another vxRail underneath and importing that into the existing resource pools, and off you go. You then got that resource instantly available to you.
Yeah.
It's very persuasive, I think, for a service provider to look at this, because the alternative of doing this is 6 to 9 months of architecture, another 3 months of hardware testing. another month of interoperability testing, probably 2 months to roll out, and it's a significant chunk of time you're cutting out straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with Cloud Foundation outside the service provider space, just seeing customers consume it and how quickly they can get complete data centers up and running. I've seen it go from months to literally 2 weeks, and that's exactly how it would be here for Dell TCP, racked and stacked in, shipped to site and then brought sort of reinstantiated. You're talking about days and hours really to have this. Well, once it's running and then you've got SDDC manager, then that agility really comes alive in terms of rapidly deploying, scaling. And then, we haven't really touched on it, but the lifecycle management for it as well. I know, typically when you're bringing in vSphere, NSX, vSAN, and then if you've got vRealize suite and everything else deployed on top of it, you could spend months just analyzing if you can do an upgrade.
Yeah, I know.
Having vxRail and SDDC manager does all that work for you as well. It just says, well, here is a patch for you. This is the order that you need to do it in, this prescriptive order, and then lets you go through. So again, if it's the security, then there's an obvious benefit there. But there's a more important thing about just features and capability. When you look at like what we're doing with Tanzu and everything around that, you can adopt that technology stack very, very quickly because again, that's a validated design. So you can have the confidence in getting those new features and capabilities out. Even if you look at vSAN at the moment is really pushing the curve from the end of last year and where it's going to this year in terms of doing object storage, file storage, and all these things. And you can adopt those technology stacks much more quicker because they've been validated and tested by VMware, and they're super easy to roll out because they have all this automation as well.
Well, and also you've got all of the VCD extensibility products that you can plug in straight away. I mean, once VCD's on there, you've got self-service, infrastructure, network, security, object storage, containers, backup, data protection. It's all,
That's it.
very simple to deploy and manage. Well, Clive, just in the interest of time, I think, is there anything else that we should kind of look at before, perhaps if we can go to Lucas and just have a quick look at the future of this?
I'll just round off by just saying we haven't got time to run through it, but I'd encourage people to come in, especially if you're from a service provider perspective, go and take a look at the other modules just to see what you do in terms of consuming the workload domain. But this is really cool stuff, especially once you get to this, because that's quite a new capability as well, the ability to distribute and firewalling driven from Cloud Director. So that's really nice to sort of look at how that configuration got.
And you did say that the architectural specification is linked in the manual here, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think
because that's probably a decent read for people as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you're interested in this, I'll make sure I put the link in the the comment box in any case. But good to know.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, Lucas. So where are we going with this, and what's kind of the roadmap look like for the next phases?
Yeah, great question. So before we go to the roadmap, I want to summarize 2 key points here. Is really this is a jointly validated design, and it gives simplicity and standardization to deploying really VMware Cloud Director on DTCP, which is multi-tenant. So the CSP can focus on the service deployment. We're talking about a validated design that cuts months and months, so that the CSP, this is a standardization really. So to reduce the time to deploy and provision the customer environment. And then the second point is about, we mentioned the VVD. It's really to simplify, de-risk, and accelerate VMware SDDC or hybrid cloud deployment with VVD. The VVD eliminate the guesswork, right? Deploy and operate with VMware SDDC. So to the what's next. Now, last Dell Technologies World, Dell announced even better way to ordering this to simplify your operation, right? And it's about instance, and the concept of ordering instance is an instance types for your workload needs. As you mentioned, there's a variety. So now customers can order through the instances concept. There's a compute optimized instance, there is a general purpose instance, there's a memory optimized large scale for database, for example. So that's how we will steer customers to ordering to simplify deployment. For example, let's say a CSP say, okay, I need 2,000 high performance virtual desktop with 8 gig each. So we have an instance type that is VDI built. For example, it's accelerator built. Customer can say, I need 500 VMs for high performance relational database. Well, we have one built for large scale memory optimize and so forth. Okay, so that's where we are going.
Excellent, excellent. And from a VMware perspective, the VVD for cloud providers and the VVD for enterprise are kind of merging now. And Clive, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're rapidly going towards one VVD, and the amalgamation of all these technologies into one, and equally, more importantly as well, the amalgamation of these technologies into the lifecycle manager component as well.
Yeah, correct. I mean, so yeah, it's more of a blending between Cloud Foundation and the VVD. So over the evolution of Cloud Foundation, they've aligned, and now they really are kind of one-on-one. And yeah, there's no architecture for this, no architecture. There is one SDDC, and that's really important when you think about multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, allowing any user of an SDDC to have a target, which is another SDDC. Can be massively simplified just by standardizing the architecture. And that's a really powerful point about what VVD evolution has been about, is about making everything work. So when we can do the real magic, like long distance vMotion, it'll work, because at the other end, it is, yes, it's running vSphere, but is it running standard architecture? Can that workload do something when it gets there? And that's really kind of the end game. We're in a really good place now where with VCF that makes it really possible to do really cool and impressive stuff in terms of hybrid cloud or multi-cloud architecture.
Yeah, the future's getting really interesting now. I mean, we've started off almost down our own route with this, with cloud service providers and doing our own VVD, and it's been great to see the kind of the priority change from VMware, the strategies aligning as well. And cloud providers, the portfolio products becoming more important across the board, and more growth in there is actually sort of driving and pushing now the fast tracking of these alignments for VVDs and Lifecycle Manager. So, and you're absolutely right. Having the same stack specification at both ends, guarantees you something's going to work a lot better than if you didn't have it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sort of aligns into just being a VMware cloud rather than a collection of products that have this configuration. It's just, let's go and deploy a VMware cloud.
Yeah, exactly. VMware SDDC. Yeah. Listen, guys, thank you so much. Clive, thanks for walking us through the hands-on labs. I'll make sure the links are in the comments for everyone. Really appreciate your work there, and it's really, really exciting to see. I hadn't quite figured it was actually that extensive, so I'm really pleased to see that, and I'm sure our partners will enjoy going through that. And Lucas, thank you so much for coming on and presenting where Dell Technologies is going with this and the good work that's been done so far. I think it's a great solution for service providers. And just Lucas, as a kind of a next call to action for a service provider, is there anywhere they should go, anywhere they should kind of look at? What's the kind of their reach out for them if they're interested in next steps here?
Yeah, reach out to your account management team, the sales contact that you have, because we'll announce a lot of more on the upcoming Dell Technology World around instances and how it's easy to order, really.
Okay, brilliant. Well, you heard it here. So thank you very much again, chaps, and take care. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.